At my wife's funeral, her brother pulled me aside and whispered, "Half of the estate is mine." I kept a straight face, saying nothing. But when the lawyer stood up to read her final letter, the entire room went silent. If you want to know what happened next, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Edward Lane. I am 72 years old, a retired teacher, and a widower as of 2 weeks ago. My wife, Margaret, was the love of my life. We were married for more than 40 years. She was kind, thoughtful, and stronger than I ever was. She was the glue that held this family together, the one everyone leaned on when times were hard. Her funeral was one of the hardest days of my life. I stood by her casket, numb with grief, while my daughter Emily held my arm to steady me. She is 34, my only child, and a single mother. She has always carried more weight than she should have, caring for me and her son at the same time. That day, her eyes were red from crying, but she stayed by my side as people came to pay their respects. Family and friends filled the room with soft voices and lowered heads. I tried to focus on their words, but everything sounded distant. The only thing keeping me steady was the warmth of Emily's hand. She kept whispering, "We'll get through this, Dad," and I wanted to believe her. Then, as I stepped aside to catch my breath, Margaret's brother Charles came up to me. He leaned in close so no one else could hear and whispered, "Half of the estate is mine." His timing was cruel, his tone cold. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw greed staring back at me. I didn't respond. I stood silent, my face calm, though inside my heart burned. I knew that day was about Margaret, not about money. Still, his words sank deep, and I could feel Emily watching us with confusion and worry. That was when I realized the funeral was not the end of my struggle. It was only the beginning. The words Charles whispered at the funeral echoed in my mind long after the service ended. "Half of the estate is mine." They weren't just words. They were a threat, a claim. On the day I buried my wife, when my heart was breaking and my daughter was clinging to me for strength, her brother had the audacity to turn grief into a transaction. I wanted to shout at him, to tell him that Margaret would have been horrified by his greed, but instead, I kept my silence. Years of teaching and age had taught me that anger spoken in the wrong moment does more harm than good. Still, that didn't mean I wasn't shaken. Emily noticed. She always noticed. As we left the cemetery later that day, she held my arm tighter than usual. "Dad," she asked gently, "what did Uncle Charles say to you?" I saw the way he leaned in. I didn't want to burden her. She was already carrying enough, raising her young son alone, managing bills, and now grieving her mother. But she pressed again, her voice smaller this time. "Did he say something cruel?" I looked into her tired eyes so much like Margaret's, and I couldn't bring myself to lie. "He said he wants half of your mother's estate," I admitted. Her face fell. She stopped walking for a moment, her hand gripping mine tightly. "He said that to you? Today? At her funeral?" I nodded. "Yes, and he meant it." Emily's eyes filled with tears, though not just from grief this time. "Dad, Mom would never have wanted that. She wanted me safe. She told me so many times she was making sure of it." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know, sweetheart, but Charles thinks he's owed something. He always has. Ever since we married, he acted as if Margaret belonged more to him than to me, as if her choices were his to question. And now, with her gone, he thinks he can take what was never his." That night, the house felt colder without Margaret's presence. Emily sat at the kitchen table with me, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she never drank. She was quiet, but I could see her mind racing. She worried for me, but also for herself. Without Margaret's support, Emily knew she and her little boy would have to depend on whatever security her mother left behind. If Charles succeeded in claiming half, Emily would lose more than money. She would lose the stability her mother had promised her. The following days only deepened the tension. Charles began calling, his voice sharp and impatient on the other end of the line. "Edward, don't make this harder than it has to be. You know Margaret would have wanted me taken care of too." I bit back the words I wanted to scream. "Charles," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "this isn't the time. We'll let the lawyer handle it." He scoffed. Lawyers twist words. Families should be fair, and fairness means I get my share. When I hung up, Emily was standing in the doorway, her face pale. He's not going to stop, is he? She asked. No, I said honestly. He won't stop until he's told the truth in a way he can't twist. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Dad, what if the will isn't clear? What if he takes it from us? Her fear pierced me deeper than Charles's threats ever could. This wasn't just about me, or even Margaret anymore. This was about Emma, our daughter, our only child, and the life her mother had wanted her to have. I could see the weight pressing on her, the terror of losing not just her mother, but also the security of her future. I reached across the table and took her hand. Your mother was a woman of fairness, Emma. She knew what Charles was like. She wouldn't leave room for him to destroy what she built for you. Trust her. Emily nodded, but the tears slipping down her cheeks betrayed her fear. She wasn't just grieving anymore. She was caught in the middle of a battle she had never asked for. Her uncle's greed had turned her mourning into dread, and I felt helpless watching her crumble under it. That was the true conflict. My wife's death should have brought our family together, but instead, it exposed the cracks Charles had always tried to widen. He saw her passing not as a loss, but as an opportunity, and he didn't care who got hurt in the process. In those days leading up to the lawyer's reading of the will, the tension was unbearable. Every phone call, every knock at the door made Emily flinch. She feared it was Charles pushing harder, demanding more. I kept my composure, but inside I burned with quiet fury. I knew I had to stay strong, not just for myself, but for Emily. Margaret had trusted me to protect our daughter, and I would not fail her now. No matter how Charles pressed, no matter how cruel his timing, I was determined that Emily would not be his victim. But I also knew that words alone would not be enough. The only thing that could end this conflict was Margaret's voice, and though she was gone, I trusted she had left her truth behind. The week after the funeral dragged on like a storm that refused to pass. The grief was heavy, but the weight of Charles's claim made it heavier still. Each day I saw the toll it took on Emily. She tried to be strong in front of her son, but when the boy was asleep, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, with worry etched deep into her face. Dad, she whispered, what if Uncle Charles is right? What if Mom didn't leave things clear enough? What if he takes the house? What if he takes everything? Her voice cracked, and her hands shook as she wrapped them around her teacup. She was not just my daughter in that moment. She was a frightened child again, looking to me to protect her. My heart broke seeing her like that. Margaret's passing had already left her vulnerable, and now her own uncle's greed threatened to undo the little security she had left. I reached across the table and took her hand. Emily, listen to me. Your mother knew who Charles was. She knew the way he thought. I have no doubt she made everything clear. She would never let you and your son be left unprotected. Trust her. Trust me. She tried to smile, but I could see her doubt. I just don't want to lose the home I grew up in, she whispered. You won't, I promised. Not as long as I'm alive. It was then I made my decision. I would not argue with Charles. I would not let him drag us into shouting matches or wear us down with threats. Instead, I would wait for the lawyer's office, where Margaret's voice would be the only one that mattered. Her words would have the final say, and I knew they would be stronger than anything Charles could invent. The day of the reading came faster than I expected. Emily drove us to the lawyer's office, her hands gripping the wheel tightly the entire way. She was silent most of the drive, lost in her thoughts, but every so often I caught her, glancing at me, as though trying to draw strength just by looking at me. When we arrived, Charles was already there. He stood in the hallway outside the office, his posture proud, his face sharp with expectation. When he saw us, he gave a thin smile that carried no warmth. Edward, he said with a nod. Emily, I trust you'll both accept the truth today. Emily flinched, her eyes dropping to the floor. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. The only truth that matters is the one Margaret left behind. His smile faded, replaced with a glare, but I didn't let him see my anger. This was the choice I had made, to meet his greed with composure, to hold my ground without lowering myself to his level. Inside the lawyer's office, the air was tense. The room was quiet, lined with shelves of books, and the faint smell of polished wood. We sat at a long table, Emily on one side of me, and Charles on the other. I could feel the tension radiating from both of them. Emily's fear like a trembling heartbeat, Charles' arrogance like a stone wall. The lawyer, a man who had known Margaret for many years, greeted us with a solemn expression. He placed a folder on the table and cleared his throat. Margaret Lane left both a will and a personal letter to be read aloud today. I will go through them in full, but know that her instructions are clear and legally binding. I glanced at Emily. She bit her lip and clutched my hand under the table. Her eyes were wet, and I could feel her hand trembling in mine. She was terrified of what was about to come. Charles leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. "Let's not waste time," he said. "We all know Margaret would want things divided fairly." The lawyer frowned at his interruption, but continued. "We will let Margaret's words speak for themselves." As the lawyer began to open the letter, I steadied my breathing. I had made my decision the moment Charles whispered to me at the funeral. I would not let anger, fear, or pride take over. Margaret's voice would be enough. She had always been the one to bring truth and fairness to every situation, and even in death, I believed she would protect us. I squeezed Emily's hand gently. "It's going to be all right," I whispered. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I hope you're right, Dad. I really hope you're right." And then the lawyer unfolded the letter and began to read. The words on that page were about to decide everything: our home, our future, and whether Charles's greed would win or Margaret's love would endure. The lawyer unfolded the letter with deliberate care, the sound of paper stretching across the silence of the room. Emily's grip on my hand tightened, her knuckles pale as she braced herself. Charles leaned forward, eyes glinting with expectation, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked like a man already convinced of victory. The lawyer cleared his throat. "This is the personal letter left by Margaret Lane, written and signed by her hand. It reflects her final wishes and carries legal weight alongside her will." My heart pounded as I heard her name spoken aloud. It had been only weeks since we buried her, and yet here she was again, her presence alive in the words she had left behind. The lawyer began to read. "To my husband Edward, and to my daughter Emily, if you are hearing these words, then my time has passed. I wish I could be with you longer, but since I cannot, I want to leave you with truth, love, and clarity. I know grief can cloud judgment, and I want to make sure no doubts or disputes can damage what we built together." Emily gasped softly, her eyes filling with tears. I squeezed her hand, fighting my own emotions. The lawyer continued. "To my brother Charles, I know you may be present as these words are read. I must speak plainly. You are not entitled to any part of my estate. I repeat, nothing that I built with Edward, and nothing I leave behind for Emily, belongs to you. Family is not about entitlement. It is about love, sacrifice, and loyalty. These were things you often struggled to give." Charles shifted uncomfortably, the smug look vanishing from his face. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. The letter pressed on. "My estate, in full, is to remain with my husband Edward for his lifetime, and afterward, to pass to my daughter Emily. She has been by my side in my hardest years, caring for me, and standing strong through burdens she never asked to carry. I want her future secured, and I want her son raised without fear of losing the home we built." Emily broke into quiet sobs, covering her mouth with her free hand. I pulled her closer, letting her cry against my shoulder. The weight of her mother's love, spoken even from beyond the grave, was overwhelming. The lawyer's voice softened as he read the final lines. "Edward, my love, you were my partner in every sense of the word. You gave me a life full of meaning. I trust you to protect Emily now, as you always have. And Emily, my sweet girl, remember that I am with you always. Whenever you look at this home, know that it is yours, not to be taken, not to be shared with those who would not honor it. To my brother Charles, I leave only this reminder. Family is earned through love, not claimed by greed." The room was silent when the lawyer lowered the letter. Emily clung to me, her tears soaking my jacket, her sobs filled with both sorrow and relief. I kissed the top of her head, whispering softly, "She thought of you until the very end." Charles' face was pale, his hands shaking. He tried to speak, his voice breaking. This can't be right. She wouldn't say that. She knew I needed help. She knew I... The lawyer interrupted firmly. "The letter and will are both legally valid. There is no ambiguity. Margaret Lane was explicit in her instructions." Charles slammed his fist against the table, his composure cracking. "She was manipulated. Edward, you made her write this." I looked at him steadily, my voice low but unwavering. Margaret didn't need me to tell her the truth. She lived it. She knew who stood by her and who didn't. Emily lifted her head, her eyes still wet, but filled with a strength I hadn't seen in weeks. "Uncle Charles," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Mom loved you, but she never trusted your greed. You made her right." The words silenced him. For once, Charles had no clever reply, no smug retort. He stood there trembling, his lips pressed together, as anger and shame fought across his face. The lawyer gathered the documents. "This concludes the reading. The estate remains fully in Edward's possession, and afterward, it passes directly to Emily. There is nothing further to contest." Charles pushed his chair back violently, muttering under his breath as he stormed toward the door. His departure left the room heavy, but also strangely lighter, as if a shadow had been lifted. Emily turned to me, tears still falling, but her expression filled with gratitude. "Dad, Mom saved us. She made sure we'd be okay." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak at first. "Finally," I whispered, "she always kept her promises." Even now, for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt peace settle over me. Her voice, carried through that letter, had not only ended Charles's claim, but had given Emily the reassurance she needed most. Margaret had done what she always did, protected her family, even when she could no longer be here in person. That day, grief was still, but it no longer felt like despair. It felt like love, alive in the words she left behind. When Charles stormed out of the lawyer's office, the heavy echo of the door slamming behind him seemed to close a chapter that had been threatening to tear us apart. For a long moment, the room was quiet, except for Emily's soft breathing, as she tried to calm herself. She had cried through much of the letter, and I could still see the tears drying on her cheeks. But now, her expression was different. Her fear had softened to relief, and in her eyes, I saw something stronger, a sense of being protected, even from beyond the grave. We sat there together, not speaking at first. The lawyer gave us our privacy, quietly organizing the documents, and then excused himself with a respectful nod. When the door shut, it was just me and Emily, father and daughter, still holding on to each other in the wake of Margaret's words. Emily turned to me, her voice breaking but steady enough to be heard. "Dad, Mom saved us. She knew exactly what to say. She made sure Uncle Charles could never hurt us." I placed my hand over hers, feeling the warmth of her grip. "That was your mother," I said softly. "She always thought 3 steps ahead. She always knew what we needed, even before we did." For years, Margaret had been the quiet strength of our family. She had comforted Emily during childhood fears, supported me through long nights of work, and carried the weight of love that bound us together. Even in death, she had left us a gift, not just an inheritance of property or savings, but an inheritance of peace. She had ended the battle before it could destroy us. On the drive home, Emily was quiet, staring out the window as the afternoon sun spilled across the road. Her silence wasn't heavy like before. It was thoughtful, lighter somehow. I let her have that space, knowing she was finally beginning to process not just the grief of losing her mother, but the security her mother had left behind. When we pulled into the driveway, Emily's son ran out of the house, his small arms open wide. He threw himself around her legs, asking when Grandma was coming back. Emily knelt down, her tears returning, but this time they were gentler. She hugged him close and whispered, "Grandma isn't coming back, sweetheart, but she made sure we'll always be safe." Hearing those words, I felt my chest tighten. For weeks, Emily had been crushed by fear, wondering if Charles would strip away the only stability she had left. Now, she was speaking with the confidence her mother had gifted her. That was Margaret's final victory, not shutting Charles out, but lifting Emily up. That night, as we sat together in my living room, Emily rested her head on my shoulder. She hadn't done that since she was a child. Her voice was soft, almost like a prayer. "Dad, I feel like Mom is still here, like she's still watching over us." "She is," I told her. "Every word she wrote proves it. She may not be sitting here with us, but she hasn't gone anywhere. She's in this house, in you, in your son. She'll always be here." The weight of those words settled over us, like a blanket of comfort. I thought about the years ahead, the challenges we would still face, and the absence that would never fully heal. But I also thought about the legacy Margaret had left, one not measured in money or property, but in love, loyalty, and the courage to speak the truth even when it would hurt. Charles would never understand that. His heart was too clouded by greed. He would live the rest of his days chasing what was never his to claim. But Emily, she would carry her mother's strength forward. She would raise her son with the knowledge that love, not entitlement, is the greatest inheritance anyone can leave behind. As I sat there with my daughter, I realized Margaret's final letter had taught me something too. I had always believed my role was to protect Emily, to be her shield, but that day reminded me that sometimes protection comes not from standing in front of someone, but from standing beside them, sharing their burden, and reminding them they are not alone. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to heal. She started smiling more often, speaking about her mother not just with sadness, but with pride. She told stories to her son about Margaret's kindness, her laughter, and her strength. And every time she did, I could see Margaret's legacy taking root in the next generation. For me, the lesson was clear. Greed can poison even the closest bonds, but love has the power to silence it. Margaret had the final word, and that word was love. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from.